Well, welcome everybody to another rendition of Succurri's monthly webinar. We do this all the time. We post all this stuff on our YouTube channel. We'll give you some of that information. Today, we're taking a little bit of a different tack, and you can read the title, but customer satisfaction, and I was talking about this with my wife, has taken a new turn with all this technology out there. So I'm actually glad we're talking about customer satisfaction scores and why it's so important in the IT world. Either both to evaluate your current IT provider and or choose your next one. And so we've got Grant and Andrew Ekstrom. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, Tony.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you again and again and again and again. No. So today's conversation is an interesting one. So to kind of frame this whole thing, I want to talk about the role of IT in business success. And it's not just about fixing widgets and computers. So I want to go into that a little bit with you guys. And of course, obviously the importance of why client satisfaction, or CSAT is known, is such a critical thing, maybe more importantly than a lot of people might think. We'll talk about some of the red flags that come up in some providers, and what to look for. And because we have all this live data, well, we've got live CSAT scores, and what does that really mean? And we'll dig into that. And of course, at the end, we've got a giveaway that we'll give to everybody. This is one of many topics we cover. This happens to be in the realm of IT leadership. We've got our YouTube channel out there. We switch a lot of different topics with you guys, and I love the approach that you guys take. So if you're not catching this live and you catch this on our YouTube channel, that's great. We'll post some of this stuff on LinkedIn, but as always, make sure to like and subscribe. Do the thing that everybody does on YouTube. We have a growing number of viewers and followers out there, so that's great. So let's dig into a little bit of this. Let's talk about the role IT plays in business success and kind of how you measure it. And I put on this slide, productivity, growth, and team morale. I think those are the big three things. I thought those things and I was like, okay, this is what I think. There's a set of metrics about how fast is your technology working? Is your internet up? Are you maintaining costs? But when I put this up, Grant, what do you think about, or how do you look at how IT plays in business success, the role that it plays?
Well, when it comes to like speed, uptime, and cost, like I said, I think those are the bare minimum of entry of being an IT provider, right? Those are things that you should be able to do as a baseline service for your clients. Where go back. I've been in this business for a long time, and so those were metrics that we used to be judged on, right? That was what people like, reliability, uptime, and obviously cost has always been part of it. But that landscape has dramatically changed, even in like the last 3 years, but definitely over like the last 10 years, where the assumption of reliability and uptime and speed and costs, those are already baked in the model, right? They're the new assumptions that people are looking for is that you can bring real-time analytics to the company. You can help the business grow, right? You're providing efficiencies from a strategic level, right? And CSAT is something that's relatively new. I see in the last couple of years where IT has kind of been this, this hole where like you don't really know how to manage this part of your business. Like enterprise, I think figured it out probably a long time ago where the outsourced IT services probably didn't really have that in place, right? We weren't showing how we're helping business and how the end users that we were supporting were really satisfied with the services that we're giving with them, right? And I like to talk about the water cooler metrics that was our line of success, was like if we were being talked about well at the water cooler, then we were doing okay. But that's not a great metric to use, right? That's just hearsay. And so being able to provide true, undeniable stats about how the employees are deeming the services is critical, right? That you now have effective metrics to be able to manage a portion of your business, and in this case, IT.
Let me see if I can translate what you just said. Basically, because the technology has gotten so prevalent in business, our expectations as business owners or operators is kind of like, look, it's like electricity. When I flip the switch, it should be on, right? With technology, if we have computers, if we have internet, that should all just work and we should be able to do that. And so our expectation, the floor of our expectation has gone up. And now people get grumpy when they don't have internet. I mean, we just
Yeah.
had a big storm here and internet and power was knocked out. I mean, it's almost like, what would you rather have, power or internet? And the answer is the internet.
You got a battery. You got a battery on your phone, right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
um,
And that's evolution, right? So when I started my career, there was zero tolerance for downtime with phone systems, right? And I think that's there's been a paradigm shift of people are like, yeah, okay, my phone actually ringing is less of a big deal than having the internet and being able to communicate on social and having your emails, things like that. So it shifted into what are priorities for communication. And along with that, you have to shift your mentality as a business owner of what you're looking for and what metrics you need to have.
so thinking about expectation, if technology is working well, everything's going is working efficiently. I can get access to information. I can communicate. I I tend to be a happier worker, a happier person in my job. And so having a real-time way to measure that and a consistent way to measure that is kind of the new way to think about it. And if you're not measuring it, what you're saying is, well, it's really just, I don't know if people have water coolers anymore. It's the Brita faucet filter they're around now. But because you have a lot of remote workers and things like that as well. But it really does. Morale is a real thing around technology, which I think is great. It's strange a little bit. I've been around a little bit myself, and it's kind of interesting. It's like, oh yeah, the standard. Oh, uptime standard, working standard. How do you feel about it? How efficient are you? Are we actually helping you grow your business? It's not just techie stuff anymore. It's really like, tell us how this is going.
Well, something that people don't think about a lot is when it comes to staff churn and you have employees that are potentially coming and going or even recruiting, IT is becoming a big part of that. Where if you got somebody that's not satisfied with IT, that is a potential component for somebody leaving, right? And or if you have a really, really good IT infrastructure and management, that could actually be a sales pitch for having somebody come aboard. I saw it back in the days of like the mortgage industry where you had people that were really interested in social media in its beginning stages. And yes, I'm that old. And so having somebody that was really good at IT was an important factor for onboarding some of these new staff and critical for keeping that. I think we're starting to see that as well in other industries as that is becoming more of the norm. So if you have somebody that's not satisfied and they're not getting the help that they're looking for, and that's directly impacting their bottom line, they're going to move. So,
Well,
Yeah.
and
So
I was
I
going
was
to
just
say,
saying,
Andrew, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, I had a customer not that long ago talk with me about a high profile person that they'd been working to recruit to their business. The person was going to start, shortly. And she called me and said, hey, I just want to make sure that you guys put just an extra amount of polish on the delivery of the computer and making sure everything is just right, because I really want to impress this person.
Okay.
And, when you look at it from that standpoint, like, once again, it's the baseline, right? The delivery, the uptime, the speed, like everyone considers that a minimum now. And so like if you don't have it, then you're have a deficit when you're talking about like recruiting or maintaining staff. When I started my career, computers were becoming important, especially like in the accounting departments, because they needed the calculation abilities. But like the internet was just beginning. And if it went out, everyone's like, okay, I'm still doing paper. And, they kept on chugging versus, and at that time, if computers didn't work, people just kept on working. Now we've hit that pivot point where, you can't work without your computer or without the internet or without your like technology tools. And so people just don't want to put up with it because, you don't want to work at a job where you can't be productive. It's, horrible.
It is. It is. And you guys are bringing up something that it's almost like it's part of the culture. Because at least I personally have been in a business where leadership kind of, I don't know, maybe IT was a backseat, or it was always a Band-Aid, or it was kind of like, yeah, this is an expense and we kind of get by, and, we have to rub two sticks together and bubble gum and wrapping tape, to get all this stuff to work right. And I'm exaggerating, obviously, but there's sometimes when leadership, you realize when you're in a place where they don't really put an emphasis on productivity because they feel like, oh, we're saving this money by creeping along with getting this stuff to work and making it last as long as it can last. And
I feel like that's a good idea for a webinar.
Yeah, I'm feeling one.
But
I think we already have it up on YouTube. Check it out. IT
I've
Bleed.
been in both of the cultures where you're like, man, not this again. It's like, can we just make this work? Or no, you can't work remotely because we don't have support for you remotely. So when you work remotely, you don't get support. There's just all these things that you can do with a well-oiled machine that you can't do when you're just trying to, skimp by. And so what you guys are saying is, look, part of the mark of a really good IT staff, whether it's internal or a provider, external provider like Succurri, if you're not measuring CSAT all the time, everything's just hearsay on about how well it's going. That's really what you're saying.
Yeah, because you may only get the opinion of maybe 1 or 2% of your entire staff, right? And would you ever make a decision about your company with 1 or 2% of the information, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, and so having every part of your business has metrics, right? And key performance indicators of how, and that's how you decide where to pivot in your business. There shouldn't be any department without that, right? And IT is just another one that for companies that outsource IT, obviously they don't have necessarily that information at their fingertips. And so the IT provider has to provide that for them. And if they're not, that's something that you should be asking for.
Yeah. Yeah. So this one, I put this, it's like, hey, if you're experiencing these things, like you're already behind, pull the ripcord on the relationship. But I put these in there because you guys, when I brought this up, you guys were like, well, why do we have this? This goes without saying. Right. But when we started talking about it, your take on it was interesting to me because it was more psychological, and we'll get into some of these things about how people make decisions in businesses and put up with this stuff, why they put up with this stuff potentially. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. So, you guys were like, hey, look, red flags, poor service, unresolved technical issues that just keep coming up, or they just don't get around to handling your issues, slow response times. If you're getting any of these, you should look for alternatives or really dig in with your provider to figure out what the heck is going on. Why is this happening? Andrew, what's your take on these three?
So like when I started my career 20 plus ish years ago, these were the things that companies were interested in. Like Grant and I built our business on resolving these issues. And part of this is like Grant and I are also becoming those, older mindset people who are like, oh, this is how you do it. And as we were like talking our way through this, we realized that these issues were solved 10 years ago, like poor service, unresolved issues, slow response times from your IT provider. Like that was solved a long time ago. It's not like there's 1 or 2 magical providers that can do it. Pretty much every decent IT provider does this now. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, if you are someone who still has these complaints, like it's not like just, hey, you should evaluate. It's like there's a lot of opportunity for betterment of your IT and how much value you're getting for your dollar spent. So go look at other providers because a lot of them will solve these problems instantaneously. And when your IT runs better, your business runs better, you make more money. And like, great, we had a webinar about the IT bleed, so I'm not going to go into that. But ultimately, we solved that problem 10 years ago. So
You're talking about
why
IT
are we still
spend.
having that as a conversation?
Yeah.
You're talking about the IT spend bleed. Yeah.
And I think Andrew, so when we were talking about it the other day, Andrew pointed out something that was kind of interesting, was that if you're seeing some of these things still happen, right? And I think, Tony, you went past the slide there, but if you're seeing like the poor service or the unresolved issues or the slow response times, if you are paying a decent rate for IT services, these things should not exist, right? And that's when I said pull the ripcord, you've got a major problem. I think that these things still exist in different types of service delivery models. And it comes from the low cost provider expectations, right? And so we are not all created equal by any means, shape, or form, right? IT is become commoditized, but there are different levels of IT providers and people that are capable of delivering different types of services with efficiency or without that. And so if you're poor service or unresolved issues and you're like in a time and materials type environment, that is by the nature of that agreement, right? And so the expectations are not clearly set. Where when you're in a managed services environment where you have fixed fee contracts, these things should not exist, right? That's why I wanted to point out the pull the ripcord of like, if you're in a time and materials and like you just want to be able to call somebody when you want to call somebody, you have to have some lowered expectations, right? And you're gonna have some things that are probably go unresolved because you're not having any strategic level or thought process into how your IT is being done. You're just calling up somebody randomly. And if you're in a time and materials environment, you are the one who's in charge of your IT, not your IT department. And I think that's a common misconception is like, oh, I've got somebody to call me. And I'm like, nobody's thinking about you until you pick up that phone, right? And then when you pick up that phone, that's when they're going to help you in that narrow scope of time. But if you are in time and materials, you are your own IT department. So I just want to make sure that I pointed that out because this does exist. I actually have had calls with people. They're like, and they're in that exact same scenario where they're in a time and materials. These are the types of things that they're happening. And I'm like, the only way to get out of that is getting into a managed services where somebody is actually watching out for what's happening in your environment.
Well, there's an actual conversation we can have, those two models, because essentially what you're saying is, and I know what goes on in business owners' minds because we've been there too, or I've been there, where you're like, I can't really afford, or at least I think I can't afford a fixed monthly fee that I have to be responsible for just IT. I'm exaggerating.
I will tell you that if you go down a time and materials route, it is always more expensive, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that come into play to that. So at least managed services puts it into the right cost center, right? If you have time and materials, you've got IT costs all over your P&L. And you can't put your finger on what your actual costs are. Conversations are completely different. I didn't want to sidetrack, but at least I wanted to point out that I do still see this a lot in having those conversations. But it is a very specific type of service that it's coming from.
Interesting. So when we look at why CSAT, what's the real juice behind it? Why does it matter? Why do you guys invest in it? Because you put money into tracking all it. Put time and money and energy into tracking this stuff.
Foolish or not, I put it right on my website.
Yeah. There it is right there.
Yeah, it's live. Yeah. If we're not standing up to it, it tells the whole world about it. So yeah. I like kind of making the comments earlier is it comes down to every part of your business has to have measurable outcomes and there has to be value associated with the time and the money that you spend in every department. IT is no different. And so when you have an outsourced IT, that part of your business is not part of your normal business system, right? And so you're just like, somebody else is going to deal with it. But as an owner, you still have to be able to make actionable items that are actionable based on metrics. So there's lots of things, lots and lots of metrics that come from IT, right? There's everything from ticket counts and your costs life cycle management and all these other things, but how your department is actually doing, because we are, for our clients, we are their IT department, right? And so you have to be able to provide how we're doing for the rest of their staff. So,
well, it's interesting you bring up some of those metrics like tickets. Hey, I've got a problem. Can you help me? Yes, we can help you. We resolve that ticket. We've all been through that. That could be an indicator, a spike in tickets. So there could be indicators in there. But back to the point of having people that are in good spirits, happy because they're more productive, they're more efficient. Let's just say things work.
Yep.
Things aren't broken. And if they do have issues, things are fixed like that, and responses are like that. That's what gets you the high CSAT score. It took a while to put this on the site. It's like, we should just put that right smack dab in the site. And It's funny because I've had conversations where someone was like, oh, 99.3%. And I would go, that's amazing. And Sarah would go, yeah, but it was 99.8 the other day, And what I also like, which you can't really see, I don't know if you can see, but 347 responses in the last 90 days. This is the part that I like, because there are a lot of people that put metrics up that are like, oh yeah, we had, a 5-star review. We've got, oh really? How many do you have?
But it's static.
Yeah, it's static. So this just continues to add. So maybe, I know they're not sponsoring this, but there's a vendor who shall go nameless here. You actually guys have a tool that you use. Tell me a little bit about that process that you guys use that get all the responses. And actually here's one right here that you can see. This happened on 12/6, so just recently. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so we have a little easy survey. It's got either a happy face, I'm not so happy face, or an angry face on every single closed ticket. And so we're giving the opportunity for our clients, the end users that are using the service, to let us know how we're doing. Because obviously Andrew and I are, I'm not really in the ticket game anymore, and neither is Andrew. And so that's our way of knowing exactly how our team is doing. And it is directly from our clients. They're telling us how our employees are doing. It's actually part of how we're making sure that we're scoring our staff as well. Andrew uses it as metrics of when we're having reviews. We take that really, really seriously. And you want to do a little deeper dive, Andrew?
Yeah. So really for us, CSAT scores, like Grant was mentioning, they're at least two-sided. So one is the customer gives us the ability to give us their opinion on how a service ticket was handled. And then we, like Grant was saying, those scores go against the staff. So we know how the staff are doing. And now I'll like briefly touch on the staffing side, because I think it's important. So like Grant and I are perfectionists by nature. No one can do as good as we think we can do. And, unfortunately, that's a really hard mental state, or mindset to be in, because everyone, kind of is going to fail you at that stage. And so for years, we're like, oh, that staff member or our staff, and we started putting crew in, and we started getting these responses that were like so high. I mean, the scores were so high, I had to double check the measurements, because I'm like, there's no way our staff is that good. And then I realized, one, our perception as leaders was off, and that our staff were that good. Like, they were just amazing, and our customers love them. And so, one, it's helped us be better leaders, because now we're informed of how our staff are doing. And believe me, a bad egg in the bunch shows up instantaneously, because all the others do so well. The other side, like I talked about, was the customer side of things. And one of the things, I'll tell a quick little story. So as a business owner, you're trying to run a lot of different departments and do a lot of things. And IT is complex, it's nuanced, it's probably not interesting even slightly. And when people talk to you in IT, it sounds like a foreign language, right? So, so as a business owner, you're like, oh, how do I evaluate the performance of my IT? Or do you even want to get that deep where you're like, how do I evaluate? So we all kind of default back to our intuition, right? Like, I've got a feeling of things not going well. And we talked about that water cooler, like that water cooler gossip, that water cooler measurement. And unfortunately, IT is like super easy to throw under the bus because it's hard to measure what we do. People are always frustrated when they call us because they're calling us to fix broken stuff, so they're already mad. And so I have a customer, and it's quite a large customer, and we've had a really good relationship with them. They recently had a leadership change, and we've come to realize over time that when you have a leadership change, like you have to basically win that relationship back, and you have to prove to them that you're doing a good job. But also on the other side, like staff members who are a little bit frustrated about something use that as an opportunity to undermine every vendor they don't like when they want to change a vendor out. And so, this new leader he called me up and he said, "Hey, I'd like to have a call. I want to let you know that I'm not quite sure how your services are going. Like I'm getting some concerning feedback from you." I could tell though from the call, he was a very well-informed leader. He'd worked at other organizations. He was looking to have the information to make an informed decision. So we sat down for our meeting and I pulled up the dashboard that we use for CSAT measurement. And I did it beforehand because I wanted to make sure that we actually were doing a good job. And I think it was like a 98.9 measurement. It was so high that I thought he would think I was faking it. So I went back, I found all the surveys that were not like 100% happy. And I made sure I really showed him that the data was very consistent and that it was accurate. And what I told him from this is I said, this tool is really to help you understand how your staff perceive us doing. And we will look through the data and I said, your staff think that we're 98.9% really good. I'm like, that measurement is off the chart. Like past 80% is like totally satisfactory for any business. And like, that high of a measurement was just like super high. And he agreed. He's like, having 98% satisfaction on anything is really, really unusual. And so I said, so tell me about your perception that, you called me up, you said you were concerned about some things some staff members were saying. He said, yeah, they're frustrated. Like the staff are frustrated about this or this or this. And I said, okay, let's talk about actual like names or staff members. I said, is it one of these three people? And is it of these topics? And he said, yeah, it's actually all three of those. And it's those topics. And so what happened is I was able to shift him from working from a place of misinformation in evaluating our effectiveness to working from a place of tremendous information. So he was making an informed decision. And the way he was going was to extract us, which would have ultimately made his business suffer because he would have had costs for transition. New IT is unproven. Would they do as good of a job as us? Would they have CSAT? And what I was able to show him is that we are doing a really good job. And the three people who are problematic, he knew of them already, because they were frustrated about a lot of things. And when we unpacked the issues, it actually turned out these staff members were frustrated about a previous owner of the company who had recently sold, who had told his staff that we wouldn't do something that was making their lives hard, when in reality, we actually wanted to do it. We'd sent quotes and he wouldn't approve it. So the owner of the previous owner had thrown us under the bus for these staff, and they were going out of their way to get us extracted because they didn't understand. So like there was this whole swirl of misinformation, and bad decisions would have been made if I didn't have these CSAT scores like proving without a doubt that we were the right team in the right place at the right time for that company.
Well, Grant said it earlier. There's no other part of any other business that you don't measure. Well, like, why would you not measure this? And if your IT company isn't measuring this, they should be. And you also brought up something, Andrew, that is interesting to me. When people evaluate IT companies, there's a set of facts that they can look at, measurements that they can look at, but they also kind of come up against status quo. And this is where like the feeling, I don't know how to present this information, but you do a good job of describing when you have a situation where you are evaluating an IT company, be aware of the psychology behind your own way that you evaluate it, but also be aware that there are these other measurements you should be looking at. Is that a good way to frame this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, in general, just good decision making is based upon a conscious understanding of what you need. And oftentimes we're driven by a feeling of what we need. And so, right then and there, you're not making a good decision. So as you kind of start to go through these evaluation things, I can kind of help, tick them off. So we do find like status quo it's easier to stay with who we have right now. They do an okay job. They don't bug me that much. Or the one time a year where they really screw up, I forget about, or I like it. We will work through it after a little while. But I'm just so busy, I don't have time. And that's a legitimate like decision-making criteria. But I'll tell you, like that's a decision-making criteria from 10 years ago when it was hard to find good IT. It was hard to get consistent results. Now that is very, very easy. And so like changing is worth your time. So changing a provider to get a better provider is worth the effort because you are much more likely to have a good outcome. Now, what Grant talked about, whereas if you're going to the low cost provider and if you're going to buy a beer and you expect it to taste like champagne, you're going to get sorely disappointed. But you don't have to buy champagne. You can buy a nice $10 bottle of wine and get exactly what you want. So, I don't know if that analogy is like translating, but ultimately, like good IT is pretty prevalent, and at least like for those basic criteria. The other one here is this decision fatigue. So this is really kind of nuanced in two ways. One is IT is nuanced, right? We do extremely complex stuff. We have to operate at like 99% all the time to be not noticed or to like at least get good reviews. And so there's a lot of information to make good decisions. We as a managed services company make all of those decisions for our customers. This is how we're successful is we have a package service where we tell the customer the only decision you need to make is to hire us and then to share your goals with us, and we'll make sure we achieve those. But if you're in a situation where you're constantly getting bombarded by like every day, hey, can you approve this firewall? Or should we do this server? Or like, hey, this is the internet we want. You're just going to have decision fatigue because you already have decisions in your normal business you need to make. Now, the other side of decision fatigue that we find is when you hire management, like an owner hires management, that manager has to really be wanting to change. Otherwise, if they make a change and something doesn't work out, they're on the hook for it. So like, what if they make that wrong decision? So they're kind of, so like, I would say, middle management or management that doesn't have that like drive to get through the problem, they're crippled by the fact that if they make a bad decision, the whole company is going to suffer and it's going to be really obvious. And so they're like, well, the known, right? I know this other one does an okay job. Yeah. The next one is, the gut feel. We talked about that a lot. I had that story. And then the event, right? So decision fatigue basically will end at some point, but it always ends in the event, right? And so what I want to tell people is you either prepare for your plan or you're reacting to the situation. And that's like when I say the event, right?
Yeah.
Grant and I can tell you this, IT has a 5-year life cycle. Customers come every 5 years, technology cycles out every 5 years, and every customer in a 5-year period will have a catastrophic IT issue if they are not managed actively. It's inevitable. And so that's the event, right? Like it's so bad, it's so disruptive, it's so expensive that the person can no longer sit on their hands. They have to make a decision. And so then they're forced to make a decision. But now they're making a decision after their crypto lock or after they lost all their email or their business system is down. There's always expense with that. So those are the things that we...
Sorry. So what I'm getting from this is if you're a business and you're in a spot where you're like, things are going fine. But then there's this, and then there's that, and then there's this other thing. And it's more about a feel. That's the old way decisions are made.
I think I'd like to point out that if you have a feeling that everything is okay, I challenge the question of how do you know, right? Because every part of your business should have metrics behind it. And so if you're like, I think it's good, I challenge you to actually find out because the event will be potentially catastrophic to your business. It may be a business ender, right? And I think with the security issues, the cybersecurity problem that we're seeing happen, it's more likely to be a business ending event than it ever has been. And so unless you know, and unless you have metrics to show you that you're actually in a good spot, you probably aren't. Yeah. So I challenge you.
Interesting. Well, and you can't really measure unless you have CSAT. If you're,
or I mean, that's one of the metrics, right? I mean, that's a really important metric. But if you're not seeing CSAT or you're not seeing other metrics, you're flying blind.
yeah, yeah. No, that's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you
Okay,
don't run a
so
company by thinking that you're okay on your inventory, right? You
yeah,
know how much inventory you have left, right?
feels about
It
right.
feels good. The wind's blowing out of the south, right?
Right.
And then
Out
you
my
have the
window, there's no
Christmas
rain. It's
event.
not raining.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so we're now to the point where almost time for Q&A. We'll have some time for that. I'm just going to put these up, and I'll Grant, if you want to, or maybe Andrew, whichever one you want to take this kind of the one thing we always do. If there's anything you want to remember this one thing, or in this case, three things, but pick one that is kind of the biggest thing that you want people to take away from this conversation.
Yeah, and I can throw one out, and Grant, you can do one as well. So in my role as a VCIO, my job is to distill this complex, nuanced IT management thing into very specific, actionable decisions that actually move the needle to a positive direction for the customers. And so, I have to take this big funnel of information and squeeze it down to one thing that pops out. So the one thing I would tell, and like this is from a business owner or like a decision maker standpoint, is work to your highest and best ability. That doesn't mean you have to be highest and best ability in IT, but make sure you have an IT team that can tell you they're working to their highest and best, which in turn allows you as a manager and a decision maker to go do your other stuff that actually is your highest and best ability, right? So if you can look at a CSAT score or the other scores that we measure, and you can be proven that you're not just doing okay, you're doing excellent. Now you can spend all that energy on making widgets or financial transactions or whatever it is, but you're working to your highest of your ability versus trying to be an evaluator of IT, which requires like years of experience to understand the subtleties of that. So I guess what I'm saying is work to the highest of your ability, make sure everybody in your ship is paddling hard.
Yeah. To echo that, in my version of a distilled format, I'll go back to what I said. If you don't have metrics, CSAT being one of them, on how your IT is performing, you are flying blind. So ask the questions, make sure that you're able to get the metrics. And if you can't, it's time to pull the ripcord.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So do we have any questions out there? I think there is one. So John has a question. He says, "What if we wanted to get our current IT provider to start measuring CSAT with us, but they don't now? How would you recommend we approach that?" Is basically the question.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, good question. So there's a couple layers to it, but it comes down to, so each ticketing system that the IT provider is using, most of them, there's about 5 or 6 industry wide, 2 or 3 that are pretty much the gold standards, and all of those are going to have added module capabilities for these types of tools. And so it's not hard to implement. You basically add a little bit of snippet to the outbound emails as you're completing the tickets, and then that information is able to flow back, and what you do with that information at that point is up to the IT provider, but it's not that difficult to do. It's that you have to have a willingness as an owner of an IT provider, of a managed services company, to want to understand those metrics. Right. So Andrew and I did it because we wanted to have a real understanding of our service delivery when we weren't closing the tickets anymore. Right. And there's a lot of things, a lot of benefits that came from that, that were not originally thought about when we originally implemented it. In fact, I'll be honest, when we implemented it, we wanted to be able to help incentivize the staff to be extra helpful, right? And honestly, we started looking at systems, and it was like, well, how do we give birthday cards and work anniversaries automatically? And this system did it. And I was like, so that was my criteria originally. We weren't looking at it for CSATs. We were looking at it for being able to help with the employees, kind of some of their normal dates. And then we started getting a little deeper into it. We're like, oh wow, and it made it easy to start getting this information. And so we're a couple years down the line now of being able to have this information. But you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah. So it would be appropriate for a business owner or manager to ask their IT provider can we start scoring? Like what would be the language
Absolutely.
you would use?
Yeah, I mean, like customer satisfaction scores off completed tickets. I think it is completely reasonable for somebody to ask that question, or as an owner of a business to ask for those types of metrics. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what I will tell you too is if an IT provider doesn't have these metrics readily available, it means they also don't know the answer to this question. So it's very likely they're flying blind as well. And it's very common in a smaller, less sophisticated IT company where the managers are just running crazy doing tickets themselves, and they're just hoping their staff is doing a good job. Grant and I came from smaller IT backgrounds where we did tickets. And like I said, we had this mindset that no one could do as well as we were because we're perfect. And we found out that like people are doing a really good job, but we weren't aware of it until we started measuring it. And so, if you don't measure, you don't know. It was the saying, like if you don't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
So I would say that's definitely one. There is another question, Grant. Maybe you can help answer this one. So Jay's question is basically, I get what you're saying. My IT provider probably isn't a fit anymore. I really resonate with the status quo and decision fatigue. How do I start this? How do I start this process of looking for a new provider? I don't even know where to look. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know how to evaluate it. How do they start that process?
Jay, leave your phone number in the questions. No, I'll call you.
You have a number I could call you.
Yeah. No, like I said, I've seen IT become commoditized, at least from a buyer's perspective. And when I say buyers, like, new customers are going through the evaluation process, and a lot of the times I have seen decisions made strictly on a proposal, right? And I've had the opportunity to look at some of these and saying, okay, these aren't apples to apples comparisons, right? So one might be a little bit more expensive than the other, but they're not a one-to-one. And so how you evaluate that, I think, comes down to the level of the sophistication of the provider. That's how good of a job are they telling you on the types of services that they're doing? Are they able to point out where you're at today in an easy way, in an easy format for you to understand, and where you would sit with an existing, like this kind of standard provider, and where you'd sit with different package levels, right? So you understand all the things that you have as a problem in your IT services that, how can you fix these? Like it's a journey, right? You're not going to get a one-stop shop where you just cut a check and the problem goes away. It doesn't work that way. There has to be buy-off levels from the management and from the staff, and the management have to allow the IT provider to put things into play, and then the management has to stand behind that management decision and enforce some of these decisions. It happens a lot in security. So I'm in a roundabout way, Andrew, I guess, to answer your question, or Jim, sorry, I apologize. Jay's, is that you have to go through a process of looking at the different IT providers' proposals and understand that the dollar isn't an equal measurement. So one of the things that I do is I go through and I do an IT cost analysis, and actually I will give one away today.
So there it is.
The unintentional segue, but
yeah, right. Yeah, right. No,
well, but so what I do is I go through and I sit down and I talk with the prospect or whoever's coming up with this problem, saying, okay, I don't know the difference, right? And so I'll put a comparison, like, here's where you're at today in that conversation. And it doesn't take very long. I've been doing it for a long time, so I can go through in about a half hour and have a really good understanding of where you sit as an operational IT maturity level. And then I'm able to put it together of saying, okay, this is what a standard managed services package looks like, or this is what a time and materials package looks like. And this is kind of like, these are your baseline. If anybody that you're talking to should be able to give you these types of services. And you have to ask those questions, right? Like, show me in your proposal where this specific thing fills into your proposal, right? So it arms you with the tools to have an educated conversation with somebody that's just giving you a piece of paper and a number on it.
I mean, even sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
even if I mean, what you're saying is even if you have a proposal in hand and want to get that proposal evaluated, it's always good to get another thing that helps you evaluate what you're looking at.
absolutely. Because once again, you don't have any level of metrics, right? And how are you evaluating a proposal that has some line items on it? And you might be looking at three different proposals, right? And they all look the same, and some are cost more, right? And so your common thought process is, well, I'll just go for, maybe I'll shoot for the middle, right? I'll take the one that's not quite the cheapest. I'll take not the one that's most expensive because I don't know the difference between any one of these three, right? And so you have to have the information to be able to go in and ask what types of services are going to be offered in these proposals and know where your deficit is. Right. You have to know what you're missing in your current technology stack to be able to ask those questions of what you are expecting from your next provider.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be some gaps, right? Like there's, when you start getting into like the high level security type things, there might be a couple different analyses that you have to go through because there's different maturity levels that you have to, to progress through. But at bare minimum, you should have something like that to be able to judge the proposals that you're looking at.
Yeah, and before we move on, just really quickly, Jay had a follow up to that. He said, thank you for the evaluation, but he said, starting out, like he's starting at ground zero, how does he find IT providers to even get proposals? Like, where would you recommend he looks? Like, I'm from the old days, so phone book or whatever, but what would you recommend?
Okay, Grandpa.
Yeah.
The gray.
That's a great question, right? Because I don't know. There's not a directory or something out there. I think Google has become the new directory, and unfortunately, that you don't know the information that it contains is accurate. It's pulling information off a website. I always say, when I'm having conversations with potential clients, I'm not necessarily looking to get their business, right? I'm just looking to be able to set a baseline for the industry. We do that from a security perspective. We do that from a business perspective. Like, hey, this is what you should be looking at. And if you've come across providers that can't provide this level of analysis, whether it be security, whether it be cost, then you probably don't want to be working with them, right? You should be able to get this and more in the provider that you're looking for. So I don't know if I necessarily answered Jay's question properly, because I don't know if I don't have the correct answer. Where do you go find somebody other than Succurri.com is a great one to look at.
But I would say also CompTIA. CompTIA is
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're well-known industry provider, groups out there. CompTIA being one of them. We have recently become Trustmark certified. Well, that's not the designation they call it, but Trustmark certified, which is what I would say. I won't get into details, but it is basically 185 security controls that we put into play that basically are the overarching of all the security frameworks that are out there, right? We basically pass everything now. And so we've done that without being asked, right? Because we want to set the bar of what an IT provider should be at a very high level. So CompTIA is a great one, right? If you're looking for security providers, ISC2, make sure that they're certified in some way, shape, or form from ISC2. We also have that mark on our website as well. Make sure they're certified. I think that's, how do you start telling the difference between who's who? They should have some credentials backing up who they are. And if they don't have certified staff that come from out, I could care less necessarily about a vendor certification. I mean, yes, you want to have those, but you should have people that have third-party certification body certificates, especially ownership. Start there. Make sure that you don't go to a CPA that doesn't have a CPA, right? You're not going to have somebody do your taxes. You're not going to go to a lawyer that's not certified by the bar. IT shouldn't be any different.
Yeah. And, one thing I would say too, and this, you can kind of dial it back to even a little like more classics. Google is always great. Like for me, it's usually I want to see somebody in the top 4, right? Because that means they've put some level of effort into it, or they're like getting a lot of traction and Google recognizes it. The others are the classic business, trusted business advisors. Talk to your accountants, talk to your attorneys, talk to your, like whomever you do financials with. Talk to those people that are like specialists that help you move your business along. They likely have encountered IT providers that do a good job, and that they can give you recommendations that are at least like, first-hand or second-hand recommendations.
Great. That's a great one. I hadn't even thought about that, but thank you. Yeah.
Well, we're out of time here, but as always, thank you guys so much for the value of the conversation we have for businesses out there. I'm always impressed. You guys are in IT, but you know so much about the business decision-making process, the advisors you use, all those things. So please check these guys out on YouTube. Subscribe. We post stuff all the time out there. These webinars are a piece of that. There's a lot of other webinars out there about a lot of other different topics related to business and IT. So check that out and subscribe.
And they're non-technical, but they're all business related. So we won't bore you.
Yeah, that's right. Business value. Yeah.
Business value. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye.